The first time I saw the dog, I thought I was saving its life. 3 weeks later, the police found my house empty. They found 2 sets of footprints. One belonged to a dog. The other belonged to something over 8 feet tall. This is what happened. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan lost everything. The door slammed shut behind him with a sound that felt final. He stood there for a moment, holding the last few things he owned. He wanted to look back, but something stopped him. Deep down, he knew that if he turned around, he'd see life continuing without him, as if he had never existed. The town disappeared behind him. Cold wind swept across the abandoned road, carrying only silence. The kind of silence that makes you feel like someone is walking just outside your vision. People watched from their windows, pretending not to notice. No one offered help. No one even spoke. It was as if the entire town had already erased him. Even his own cousin looked away. Not because he didn't care, but because sometimes fear is stronger than family. As darkness covered the town, Ethan reached an abandoned storage shed at the edge of an old orchard. Half the roof had collapsed years ago, but it was the only shelter he had left. He spread his old blanket across the dusty floor and lay beneath the broken roof. Through the opening above him, cold moonlight spilled into the empty building. Exhausted, Ethan closed his eyes, but sleep never came. Something about the silence felt wrong. Too perfect. Too empty. Then, sometime after midnight, he heard it. A single footstep. Just outside the shed. Then another. Something was standing in the darkness, watching him. Then, sometime after midnight, he heard it. A single footstep. Just outside the shed. Then another. Something was standing in the darkness, watching him. Ethan slowly sat up, holding his breath. The footsteps had stopped, but whatever had made them hadn't left. He reached for the stale piece of bread in his backpack and carefully placed it near the doorway. If it was an animal, maybe it would come closer. Several seconds passed. Nothing. Not even the wind dared to move. Then, 2 glowing yellow eyes appeared between the trees. They didn't blink. They simply stared. Thin white dog slowly emerged from the darkness. Its ribs showed beneath its dirty fur, and every step it took was silent. Unnaturally silent. The dog stopped a few feet away from the bread, but never looked at it. It kept staring directly into Ethan's eyes, as if it already knew him. Only after what felt like an eternity did the dog lower its head and eat the bread. Then it quietly lay down near the doorway, still watching Ethan. For the first time since losing everything, Ethan wasn't completely alone. Oddly enough, that frightened him more than the silence ever had. When morning arrived, the dog was still there, waiting. It stood the moment Ethan stepped outside, as if it had been expecting him. From that day forward, wherever Ethan went, the white dog followed. Never too close, never too far, always keeping the exact same distance, like it wasn't following him, but escorting him somewhere. Ethan took whatever work he could find, loading heavy crates, repairing old fences, cleaning abandoned wells. It barely paid enough to survive, but it was enough to keep moving. The white dog was always there, not beside him, not behind him, always at the exact same distance, watching, waiting. People in town slowly stopped talking about Ethan. Instead, they started talking about the dog. One woman swore she had seen it standing in front of Ethan's old farmhouse long after midnight. It never barked. It never moved. It simply stared at the front door for hours. Soon, Children stopped playing near the old orchard. No one knew why. Whenever someone asked, they simply shook their heads and changed the subject. Days passed. Then one unbearably hot afternoon, everything changed. While clearing rocks from a dry field, Ethan swung his pickaxe into the ground. Instead of striking stone, it rang like metal, a deep, hollow sound from somewhere beneath the earth. He froze. The sound shouldn't have been possible. Then he noticed something strange. The white dog wasn't looking at him. It was staring directly at the spot where the pickaxe had landed. Without thinking, Ethan dropped to his knees and began digging with his bare hands. The deeper he dug, the colder the soil became. Finally, his fingers touched something smooth, an ancient clay jar, sealed with cracked black wax, buried where no one should ever have found it. That night, Ethan carried the strange clay jar back to the abandoned shed. The white dog followed, as if it already knew what was inside. He placed a single candle beside the jar. Its flame flickered wildly, even though the air inside the shed was completely still. With shaking hands, Ethan broke the ancient black wax seal. The moment the lid cracked open, the candle went out. Total darkness. For one endless second, the entire world became silent. No wind, no insects, not even Ethan's breathing. Then, the candle lit itself again. Inside the jar, there was more gold than Ethan had ever seen in his life. Ancient coins covered the bottom like they had been waiting for centuries. But beneath the gold, something else rested. A small, dried dog's skull. Its empty eye sockets pointed directly at Ethan. He blinked, only once. And when he looked again, the skull was gone. Only the gold remained. Ethan slowly turned toward the white dog. It hadn't moved. It hadn't reacted. It simply stared back at him, as though none of this was surprising. That was the moment Ethan realized. The dog hadn't led him to the treasure. It had been guarding it until he arrived. Outside, the wind suddenly returned. The trees began to sway, and somewhere beyond the darkness, something let out a low, almost human growl. The next morning, Ethan sold just a handful of the ancient coins. Within weeks, his life changed completely. He built a small house on the edge of town, not because he wanted luxury, but because, for the first time in months, he finally had somewhere to belong. Instead of keeping the money for himself, he quietly helped those who had nothing. An old widow received food every week. A struggling family found anonymous envelopes of cash at their door. No one ever discovered who was helping them. But the town noticed something else. The white dog. Its eyes. They weren't yellow anymore. They had become a strange golden color, almost glowing after sunset. People began avoiding Ethan's house after dark. Not because of Ethan, because every night, the dog sat outside, staring into the woods, as if waiting for someone. Then the footsteps returned, slow, heavy, circling Ethan's house. He opened the front door. No one was there. Only two sets of footprints. One belonged to the dog. The other was unmistakably human. Footprints disappeared at the edge of the forest. There were no signs of anyone leaving. It was as though whoever made them simply vanished. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, he heard something walking across his porch. Never knocking, never speaking, just walking. When dawn finally arrived, he opened the door again. Fresh footprints covered the porch, but this time, the human prints were much larger, far too large, to belong to any normal person. As Ethan looked toward the tree line, he caught a glimpse of something impossibly tall, standing perfectly still between the trees. Before he could focus, it disappeared into the morning fog. The next morning, Ethan followed the enormous footprints into the forest. The white dog walked ahead, never looking back, almost as if it knew exactly where they were going. The trail led to an abandoned stone chapel hidden deep among dead trees. No roads, no signs, just a forgotten building that looked older than the town itself. The wooden doors stood wide open. Inside, everything was covered in dust, broken pews, collapsed walls, and absolute silence. As Ethan stepped farther inside, he noticed something carved into the stone floor. Hundreds of deep claw marks, all pointing toward a staircase beneath the chapel. The white dog stopped at the top of the stairs. For the first time, it hesitated. It refused to go any farther. Ethan lit an old lantern and slowly descended into the darkness alone. Each step echoed through the underground chamber, as though someone below was counting them. At the bottom, he found an ancient room unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls were covered with burned handprints. Every single one pointed toward a massive rusted iron door. The iron door wasn't closed. It was slightly open, just enough for complete darkness to stare back at him. A cold breeze drifted through the narrow gap, carrying a whisper he couldn't understand. Then, something moved. Far beyond the doorway, a figure, far taller than any human, crossed the darkness for only a second, before disappearing again. The lantern suddenly went out. The room became pitch black. Only one thing remained visible: two glowing golden eyes, watching Ethan from somewhere in the darkness. The lantern burst back to life. The chamber was empty. The towering figure was gone. But fresh footprints surrounded Ethan, as if someone had been standing inches away from him the entire time. The white dog suddenly barked, for the first time since Ethan had met it. One sharp bark, then silence. It turned and sprinted toward the surface. Ethan ran after it without looking back. By the time they reached the forest, the sun was beginning to rise. The abandoned chapel stood quietly behind them, as though nothing had ever happened. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him home. Weeks passed. His new life finally felt peaceful. The house was finished. The town had accepted him. But one evening, the white dog never came home. Ethan searched the orchard, the old storage shed, the empty roads. He called for the dog until his voice disappeared into the night. There was no answer.